go on.
And Chris, it looks like it's trying to stream on Granicus too, but it's just giving a bunch of colored bars.
Oh, I think it's because we didn't log in to stop Granicus. Well, we'll have to delete that one and overwrite that recording later.
Yeah, because it looks like old TV colors going on right now.
Yeah, there's no video input going to that one.
Are we good, Chris?
Yes, you're good now.
Okay, so we got Mr. Robinson here. Kara Heasley is not here. She did send an email, so we'll have to get an excused absence in a minute. We got Albert Ramirez here. We're missing Jeffrey, or is it Oyer? He's not here. John Frias, he's here. TJ Benson.
I'm here.
You're here, okay. And Marcus Matley. Okay, so if I could get an excused absence for Kara Heasley, if I could get someone to make a motion.
Make a motion to excuse Kara Heasley.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we're gonna, since this is a Zoom, I guess we can go through and everyone can introduce themselves because that's what's listed. Oh, we'll do the oath of office first. So those of you that are on the committee, this is just pertaining to you. So if you would just repeat after me. I state your name. State your name.
Marcus Matley.
Do solemnly swear
Do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute
I will faithfully execute
the duty of
the duty of
a capital improvement program, CIP,
Capital Improvement Program, CIP,
for the city of Cibolo, Texas,
for the city of Cibolo, Texas,
and will to the best of my ability
and will to the best of my ability
abide by the letter and spirit
abide by the letter and spirit
of the city of Cibolos
of the city of Cibolo,
Code of Ethics and Conduct,
Code of Ethics and Conduct,
and shall preserve, protect, and defend
and shall preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution and laws of the United States,
the Constitution and the laws of the United States,
the state of Texas,
the state of Texas,
and the city of Cibolo.
and the city of Cibolo.
So help me God.
So help me God. So help me God.
Okay, so all of you will sign it next time I see you, along with another paperwork that we normally, some of you are on multiple committees, so you know the paperwork we have to do. So we'll do that at a later meeting.
All right.
Sounds like a plan, Peggy.
So I don't think everyone knows everyone on the screen, so maybe
Sure.
everyone could just introduce themselves.
I will start off by saying I'm Eddie Haas with Friesen Nichols. I'm serving as the project manager for the update of the road, water, wastewater, and drainage impact fee program. With me today is Jessica Vassar. Jessica?
I'm Jessica Vassar, and I'm leading the water wastewater portion of the impact fee update.
All right, Jim Keith.
Hey, I'm Jim Keith, and I'm leading the drainage impact fee portion.
And we have Namu Han. Uh-oh, can't hear you there. You're muted there. Oh, all right. So Namu Han, he is supporting, he's leading the technical component of the roadway component of the impact fee program update. My background is in roadway, so you get both Namu and I in the program for the roadway component, but collectively, you know, we're the lead team that is, we'll be working with you as the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee over the next 3 to 4 meetings for the update of the impact fee program. We do have a slideshow presentation. We'll be going through that. I'll leave it open and up to you if you all want to ask questions as we go along. This introductory presentation is really aimed as kind of a 101. So if you're new to impact fees, hopefully this kind of gets your feet wet. There's going to be a little technical involved tonight. We're going to seek some guidance from you on some land use assumptions. We'll describe that here in a minute. but I'm going to flip over to the
Wait,
presentation.
Peggy, did you want everybody to introduce themselves or just the Freese and Nichols team?
Well, I think the others can introduce themselves just so that everyone would know who you are. So we have a couple other people. Is it, who are we missing? I think the rest are just staff people. Kelsey is our EDC director. We have Tim Foose, who's our Public Works Capital Projects person. We have Zane Rodriguez and Corey Dale that are members of our Planning and Zoning Department. Do we have anyone else I think that's everybody, so.
Okay.
All right, thanks. I just wanted to interrupt before we jumped into the presentation.
Well, you
Thank
forgot
you.
about me, Peggy.
Oh, you've already been introduced, Marcus.
Oh, okay. And John Farias.
Yeah, we're good.
Oh, we're already sworn in. We're forgotten.
So
This is a group you're gonna have to deal with.
Oh, okay.
Well-
Hey, just want to know where I stand. That's it. Okay. Thank
it
you.
already sounds fun. We're already having fun here.
Marcus,
That's
I love you.
Where does he stand?
so out of curiosity, is are impact fees new to folks here on the advisory committee? Or has everyone had some kind of exposure to the impact fee program in the past? Just out of curiosity.
I want to say negative. I mean, I have a situational awareness that we impose them, but as far as the intricate details or, where we come up with it, I don't know if it's arbitrary or we all just vote and say we're going to increase them, right?
There is
So,
some
yes.
technical involved, and we'll walk through a little bit of that tonight. Tonight ain't really aimed at kind of getting your feet wet. As we get into the later meetings, we're going to really have more technical and how we derive some of the numbers. But the impact fees are not new to Texas. They've been around since 1988. They've been challenged and tested, and they're now becoming more prevalent as a finance mechanism across the state of Texas, particularly since the last legislature, where cities are capped with revenues from property taxes, annexations frozen. So this funding mechanism on implementing infrastructure is becoming more and more prevalent for communities across Texas. So I'm going to see if I can share my screen here. Okay. So tell me if you got it there. And do you have full screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, very good. I see thumbs up there. Great job there. Okay, very good. So as we already introduced our team members, you have this packet. This is our contact information. If there's anything that just keeps you awake at night, how did they come up with this? We're available and accessible to you for trying to answer those questions. I'm Eddie. I'll be covering roads. Jessica's water, wastewater, and Keith has the drainage component. Three things we're going to do tonight: little 101, some of the basics, the process involved. Then we're going to get into land use assumptions. Land use assumptions is kind of a forecast of how we see Cibolo growing over the next 10 years. It becomes one of the drivers for the calculation of the derivation of the cost per service unit. The cost per service unit and the impact fee are two different things. You have a derived cost per service unit, what it costs to put infrastructure on the ground. You take that cost per service unit, that's a technically derived number. It goes through a public hearing process. This is the maximum that a city can collect. You advisory committee, and then ultimately the city council will decide on a collection rate. That collection rate times a service unit generation, depending on size of development, will then calculate the impact fee. That's what we're all moving toward tonight. But one of the basic things and we're going to be doing this in building blocks, is the land use assumptions, so that we kind of understand how we see Cibolo growing, because we're ultimately going to be sizing capital improvements for each one of these components to address this growth that's anticipated to occur over the 10 years. We will be open to Q&A throughout the presentation, or if you want to wait till the end, it's your call on that. But we would like to seek your comment tonight on item number 3, and that's the growth rates, how we see Cibolo growing over the next 10 years. We've got some historic data and we've got some forecasts, and We've got a number that we think might work, but we want to make sure we capture your feedback on that. So what we have on screen is a picture of the future land use plan and your thoroughfare plan. This was per your 2016 comprehensive plan. I believe the roadway was amended later because this is dated September 2017, but big picture, this is ultimately where Cibolo is going. This is the vision of your community, how at least per the last comprehensive plan, how you see yourselves growing over 10 years. The comprehensive plan addressed some infrastructure components, the thoroughfares. It had a little bit of water, wastewater, but there's also a separate set of master planning that's gone on. You have a thoroughfare plan, you have a master water and wastewater plan, you've got a drainage plan. All those plans are aimed at facilitating that land use map that's on the screen there, okay? In the lower left, yes, sir.
Got a quick question. Are you getting into the presentation right now, or?
Yes, do you not see it?
No, so we got to follow the agenda that was put up.
I'm sorry.
So I think we're jumping ahead of a few line items.
Okay.
Peggy, was there more that we need to do after the introduction? I believe if I'm looking at the
Well, item 5 and item 6, citizens be heard, an election of chairman and vice chairman.
and then we get into the presentation.
Okay.
So I don't want to steal your thunder. I just want to knock
Okay,
these other
John,
things
what
out.
we're gonna do is, we have no citizens to be heard because nobody's written in or anything. And we're
Got
gonna put the elections of the chairman and vice chairman on the next meeting where we'll all be present.
Okay, so now we're on the agenda item. That's for the presentation. Got it. Just want to make sure.
Yes,
we're all
thank you,
tracking.
John.
Okay.
Okay, good catch there. So I guess someone has time to think about who wants to be the chair and vice chair and all that good stuff. So, so where I was going with, in the lower left, there's an image there of your comprehensive plan. In the center image there, that's your 2019 through 2024 or 2022 capital improvements plan. That's a kind of an infrastructure guide. You've gone through a robust process to define projects. We want to use that capital improvements plan since it really addresses the four big components: roads, water, wastewater, and drainage. We want to capture the projects that we can into the impact fee program so that as development occurs, new development can help pay their fair share for the cost of infrastructure. Okay. So why are we doing this update? Well, the program was initiated in 2008. There was an update in 2013. The law says, Chapter 395, Texas Local Government Code says, for impact fee communities that have impact fee programs, you have to update at least every 5 years. At least. Growth could go at such an astounding rate that it could trigger the advisory committee to send a memo to the city council, say in year 2, saying, golly, growth is just going so fast. We need to look at this CIP again and make amendments to it. But the law says that you have to look at it at least every 5 years, okay? The Chapter 395 also calls out the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee, your roles and your duties. And the requirements of that is that you are providing comments on land use assumptions, the capital improvements plans, and the impact fee. So we interpret that impact fee as really being that cost per service unit. You know, we're going to derive that number, and hopefully we get your concurrence that there's the technically derived maximum. It will be within your purview that if you feel that there is a collection rate that the council ought to consider, well, it's within your purview to forward that recommendation to the city council. The final, we have the meetings listed out here. Here we are, March 9th, where we're going to have our little impact fee 101, our land use assumptions growth rates. Our next meeting, we're going to talk about the resultant land use assumptions in a preliminary CIP. We hope to get your comment and blessing on that so that then we can go back, put cost to the CIPs, calculate that cost per service unit, do some what we call benchmarking. What are other communities that have impact fees, kind of compare what they've got. And then your final action is on June 10th, where we decide on a collection rate for the council to consider. There, in a grander scheme of things, we do have a schedule where we are going to meet with the city council, public hearing for the update of the program at the end of August. Okay. Okay, what is an impact fee? Any questions so far on your role, what you're going to be doing?
I just have one feedback, if I may,
You
Mr.
bet.
Robertson. Because I had talked about this with some members of the council when I first interviewed. At some point, and I don't know where it would fit in based on what you're proposing for meetings, I would like to see a comparison data from our surrounding communities on their impact fees, such as Universal City or Shirts or.
Yep.
Or,
yep.
Because to see if we're competitive, if we're lower, if we're higher, we need to see where we sit in the world here.
Yeah, and you know, you're on it. It becomes a economic development question. Infrastructure cost. It's going to cost a lot of money to put infrastructure on the ground long term. New development is asked to chip in a cost of that, but other communities that have impact fee programs, you want to make sure we're still kind of in economic imbalance, or we're at least, we as Cibolo, if there's some economic development strategies that are being considered, we're competitive relative to those other communities. And we have what we call a benchmarking. We're gonna have some sample land uses, like what is the cost of an impact fee for one single family residence, something that's scalable in your mind, you know, in Cibolo versus Shirts, and I think New Braunfels, Seguin, other communities that have impact fee programs around Cibolo. We'll probably look at a couple of other land uses like 10,000 square feet of office or 50,000 square feet of commercial shopping center, maybe some light industrial, just so you can see how the impact fees, what the resultant fee might be for those land use scenarios, both showing where you are now and where you will be. There'll be a slide on this coming up, but you're already on it there. I think Albert, I think I saw you had a question.
Yes, are we required to meet on all those dates?
Ideally, the advisory committee, we'd like to have you there present. We understand life happens and you're not able to make all the meetings, but at least we have to have a quorum to have the meeting. So
I just noticed that the April 20th is on a Friday. I wasn't sure if that was intentional.
no, then that would be the following Tuesday, I believe. No, we're not going to meet on Friday. We're meeting on Tuesday. So that's a bust in the schedule there. We're meeting on Tuesdays, and I believe it's the third Tuesday of the month.
Got it.
You don't want to meet on a Friday to talk impact fees?
No, not really.
April 20th?
April 20th is a Tuesday.
Yeah, it is a Tuesday.
Is it?
You,
Yeah, it's the third Tuesday, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, I missed.
Yeah.
I was thinking April 18th. Sorry.
You know, at one time
That's
we
Sunday.
were on the 18th, and right, we felt like we probably don't.
Do it again. When you spin it, whoever lands on it, you have to do this.
So it sounds like we have some young talent out there that want to join us. Anyway, so okay. Hopefully that answered your question there, Albert.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Okay. So moving ahead here. What is an impact fee? An impact fee is a one-time charge for new development coming to Cibolo and for the impact that they create on the roadway, water, wastewater, and drainage facilities. 250 dwelling unit residential subdivision is going to impact the road network. They're going to require some water or wastewater facilities. They're going to have some drainage shed. They're going to create an impact to the system. As new development comes to the Cibolo, because you have a policy in place that new development is going to share in the cost of facilities, they will be charged an impact fee, but it's only a one-time charge. This is development coming to Cibolo. This is not any kind of fee for existing development, only future development. We have to make sure we want to understand that. Some folks call this thing a tax. It's not a tax because it doesn't occur annually based on some valuation. This is just a one-time fee based on the impact that development's creating on the system. Okay. Now, the impact fee is predicated on capital improvements that are both planned. Maybe some of those are under construction now. Maybe some are recently built. But what we're doing is we're considering the cost of facilities that is being incurred by the city, and that cost is being shared for new development to contribute, but only their fair share. We're not asking new development to chip in any more than they're required. So developer may say, well, you know what, I'm building a road that's on the thoroughfare plan. Do I get credit? The answer is yes. There's credits involved. But the important thing with this program is it's a structured approach to the assessment of a fee. Before, you may have had some development agreements, maybe some horse trading. If there wasn't a program in place, maybe developer A, situated up along a roadway, was contributing right of way and maybe one lane of road, and then the guy down next to him, maybe he was just contributing right of way. This provides a level playing field. And so based on demand created by the development and the impact on these systems, we can technically derive or we can technically calculate the fee that they're impacting the systems by. Okay, so it kind of levels the playing field. Okay. Okay. All right. And so the basic premise is, and I've kind of hit all around it here, is that growth should help pay for growth. You're growing at about a 3.5%, almost 5% compound annual growth rate. All this future growth that's coming to town is going to be impacting all these structures, these infrastructure components. And so the policy in place per the impact fee program is that they should help pay their fair share. The program's been in place since 2008, updated in 13. All the administrative requirements are all located in Chapter 395 of the local government codes. The administrative requirements, the technical derivation, the noticing for the public hearings, all those things are all mandated in there. But the impact fee is not only can it be used to assess and have development pay their fair share, it can also be used to assist in determination of proportionality. Proportionality is kind of a new deal that's out there. It came as a result of a lawsuit that from a city in North Texas who had an impact fee program. Developer put in some roads, they didn't get credit. They said, wait a minute, it's not fair. I only need to be paying my fair share. They sued, they won. And so this proportionality that has come into play is that new development can only pay their fair share of impact on roads, water, wastewater, streets, drainage, anything that they're being exacted a fee from. So this program, this impact fee program, that in the end, let's say you decided to collect zero. You know, you're not collecting zero now, but let's just say we wanted to be really friendly with developers. We're not going to collect anything. You'd have this technical tool that you could assess proportionality if a developer said, I think you guys are charging me more than than the fair impact that I'm creating on the system. So you'll have this tool in place to be able to assess proportionality. Okay. And so all this gets down to who pays for growth. All right. With impact fees, new development shares, and a part of this responsibility. If you didn't have impact fees, it's just basically your tax base. And so you have two big pots of money who's paying for this, the cost of this infrastructure. And if new development's not going to chip in a portion of that, who's going to pay for that? Well, that's going to be you as taxpayers of the community. Okay. Any questions so far on what all this impact fee business is all about?
Yeah, and this might be easily defined somewhere, but this is Marcus. So new development, right? Okay, so is that inclusive of, for instance, you know how we would say in the federal, like SRM, like sustainment, renovation, modernization. Like, let's say there's a 2,000 square foot commercial building, and they turned around and turned it into a 10,000. Now, technically, it's really not a new development because it was already a pre-existing building. Now, does that definition of new development is inclusive of those things that would still impact all the different elements of, you know, what we're talking about here on the infrastructure? Or is it purely new development, like raw land and a builder builds a 250 unit apartment complex or 50 houses or whatever the unit measure might be? Just curiosity.
So actually it's that's not correct. So it's new development. But if there is an expansion on an existing development, that increase, there's an increase in demand, that increase is subject to the fee also. So you have 50,000 square foot of shopping center and they want to add on another 25,000. That 25,000 square foot is subject to the fee, right? Think about it. There's additional demand being created by this additional development. Therefore, it's impacting the system. Okay. Good question though. Yep.
Thanks.
Any other questions so far? So the impact determination is done differently within each one of the infrastructure components. For roads, it's the size of the development, the service area, we'll talk about that here in a minute, where it's located in the town, what kind of development it is, and then based on the collection rate, that's how you determine the impact fee. For water and wastewater, it's based on the meter size. I'm sorry, I jumped too fast. Roads, the service unit is the vehicle mile. It's the service unit that we can measure how much capacity is being placed on the by new capital facilities, how much demand is being created by existing traffic, and then more importantly, we can determine the service units of demand by future development. We'll get into that here in a minute. For the water and wastewater, it's the meter size. Whatever meter size is needed to facilitate whatever size of development it is, and then that's how they're assessed the fee. There's a table that Jessica works from to make that determination. But in the drainage, the impact fee is based on the square footage of impervious surface. Okay, and then the impact of that impervious surface that translates to a fee because of the drainage that's being the runoff that's being created by that impervious surface. All the fees are assessed at platting, and they're collected at permit, or when you get the building for water and wastewater when they tap for water and wastewater meter. Okay. Okay. What can impact fees pay for? It really pays for all the costs to put those facilities on the ground: construction, engineering, right-of-way, utility relocates. One of the biggies, debt service. You know, the city is typically floats some bonds to be able to pay for these things. There's a cost for bonds, and the impact fees can consider the cost of that debt service. Okay. The impact fee program can also pay for updates. This update's being paid for out of proceeds from the impact fee program. So there's no other, in theory, there's no other pot of money being hit for on this program update. Okay. There are certain things that impact fees cannot pay for. There'll be an impact fee CIP map that shows where the projects are located. There'll be some listing of where the projects are. If it's not an impact fee CIP project and not listed in that program, monies that have been collected cannot be used to pay for those facilities. Okay, so in other words, you got different kinds of CIPs. You have a general CIP in the city, and then you got an impact fee CIP. The impact fee monies that are collected from new development goes specifically and only to those facilities. They're not used for any kind of O&M and somewhere else, and that kind of hits to the next thing. And what we're talking about is really the implementation of new capacity. Impact fees do not pay for operations and maintenance. It's really only for the provision of new capacity. Okay. There are certain things that it can't pay for. It can't pay for upgrades to serving existing development. So we have to quantify excess capacity and the cost of excess capacity. So that's part of our overall calculation. And then you can't use impact fees to pay for any administrative costs that's, the city is undertaking for running the program. It's really aimed at putting those costs on the ground, trying to create some transparency there for implementing infrastructure. Okay. By way of an update, kind of a three-step process, we're going to develop land use assumptions, how we see ourselves growing. Step 2, we're going to develop CIPs to address our growth. And then we'll calculate what the cost to provide those CIPs will be. From there, we'll develop our technical reports, and then there's a public hearing process that's required, because in step 4, because you are in a program update, you're only required to have one public hearing. This will be after you make your recommendations to the city council. City council will have one public hearing where they'll hear the update of the LUA, CIP, and the impact fee. The only stipulation is that, since it is a public hearing, they close the public hearing, and there's a corresponding ordinance that's adopted within 30 days of that public hearing. Okay, so we have the program kind of slotted. Public hearing with council end of August, and then by third week in September, that's when the ordinance should be adopted. Ideally, or it'd be great if it could be adopted the night of, but I don't know the number of readings Cibolo has. If you're a 2 reading community where we need to read it one night and then they act upon it the following night or the following session?
Yes, sir. We don't have to read it twice.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Becky. And then that would conclude the overall process. And then 4.5 years later, go through the process again. Okay. All righty. So I've kind of hit around what all we're going to do to get the update of the program, get that in place, get that before the city council, and the update by way of collection rates. Some of the policy considerations that they could undertake, and this could fall in your purview if you want to consider this, and that is what rate to collect. You know, you're currently collecting at, and you have a listing of your collections for each one of these infrastructure components. Do you want to retain the same fee? In other words, no increase? Do you want to bump it up a little bit if there's the ability to raise that collection rate? Should there be an application of a residential versus a non-residential fee? Some communities want to give a break to residential development. Some communities want to give a break to non-residential to kind of spur on shopping centers and office, some of the non-residential type development. So it's whatever it's going to be, the flavor within Cibolo. But we are seeing some communities that are starting to do that. Before they had one collection rate across the board. Now they decided they're wanting to break that up, just so they can maybe collect a little higher for one or the other. There could be some special considerations. If you are located, say, within the downtown area or the historic area of downtown Cibolo, the collection rate shall be a reduction of 25%. Any kind of special considerations that can be considered as a policy item. We're seeing communities implementing what we're calling incremental increases. In other words, let's say we want to not raise we go through the study, we define what that maximum we can charge, and you're collecting at a certain rate and you don't want to raise it for year one, but in year two, you want to increase it by 5%, year three, another 5%. That's an incremental increase. A lot of communities are starting to slowly bring that in. You know, COVID in play, a lot of things changing dynamics of folks working remotely. They want to be a little friendlier to development, that they're considering an incremental increase. There are other special considerations, and whatever those might be, if it's along maybe a target corridor or something, that there could be a reduction in the impact fee. Waco, we finished their program. They implemented a new program. They had policy items like legacy. If you're a legacy business within Waco, then there's a certain kind of reduction, infill types of considerations. So there's all kinds of special considerations that could come into play as part of policy. Okay. There are some exemptions here. Public schools, their ISDs, they don't have to contribute if they don't want to. Public housing is also exempt from impact fees, federal public housing, or any other local land use as defined by policy. Let's just say it's coffee shops within the downtown area shall be exempt, whatever is the local policy. And I'm kind of opening up broadly on this policy business, because we're going to go through a lot of technical to get to that bottom line. What does it cost per unit of infrastructure, per unit cost to put the infrastructure on the ground? And then it's pure policy on what the city wants to collect and how they want to do that. Okay, that's why we're showing what some of these considerations may be.
And
Sure.
it could also be a different collection rate inside the city limits versus in the ETJ. If you're trying to incentivize growth in your city limits, you could have lower fees in your city limits and a higher fee in your ETJ, which only applies for water, wastewater, drainage. Roadway, you can only charge those fees in the city limits, but for water, wastewater, that could be a consideration.
That's an important distinction. A lot of communities are trying to avoid the sprawl, trying to encourage infill or within the city limits. And so, yeah, that's kind of a biggie that we're seeing out there now. Any other questions on kind of some of the policy stuff? We'll be getting into this as we get along in the program. Okay. So by way of the process, plat goes through you as the Planning and Zoning Commission. Oh, by the way, if we do have a meeting in the future where you're the Planning and Zoning Commission, we have to close that meeting. Then you have to convene as the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee, or vice versa. So just kind of FYI on that. So by way of process, there's the plat that's submitted, that assesses the fee. It's based on that final plat. And the fee that's collected is what's based on is the policy that the city has in place. So there's actually two things. There's an assessment, which is what we call Schedule 1, and that's typically the maximum the cities can charge. But Schedule 2 is what will probably apply, and that is what by policy what the city is deciding to collect. And the reason that we make a distinction between assessment and collection is if there is a challenge by way of proportionality, because the true impact is typically that maximum assessed, but it's a policy decision on a collection rate. Okay, and then the fee is collected at the time of building permit, or if when there's a wastewater tap. Okay, and to your question there, I don't remember who it was that asked the question, but fees are imposed on new development or expansion, and that is a change to a higher intensity use or added square footage of development. Okay, questions? Okay, I'll keep moving.
Wait,
and then
can I clarify on that? Sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
It's not like adding square footage to your house.
That's
if you're keeping it as a single family residence, there's not an impact fee on that. I didn't want there to be any confusion.
Right. It's typically in the that's a great catch,
For
Jessica.
commercial, for non-residential, right?
It's
Right,
typically
right.
in the non-residential area.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. I just didn't want anyone that was maybe planning some sort of improvement on their house to be worried about this.
Right. I mean, multifamily is a little bit different, right? You add on another 250 units, that's new units, that's an impact.
Right. But
Typically
adding an
on
extra bathroom, probably
Right.
not gonna make it. Okay.
Yep.
Keep going. Sorry.
Yep. Good catch. Good catch. And this is here's a picture of kind of the benchmarking we're going to go through. And in this case, we were looking, this is Waxahachie. It is part of their update. This is showing the actual impact fee of one single family residence. Okay. What in 2004 they were collecting roughly $6,300. The new program, what they could collect as the maximums. Here are some of the peer cities around Waxahachie. We'll do the same kind of thing here in Cibolo. We'll definitely include your neighbor to the south or Schertz, New Braunfels, Seguin. I think I heard someone say Universal City. I don't know if they have road impact fees. They might have water, wastewater, but they might not have roads. But all those
Hey,
I'm
this
sorry?
is Marcus. Could you put in Live Oak in that analysis if they do that? Live Oak's had a lot of growth, with obviously with IKEA and that huge center. I'm just curious to see what they're charging over there as well.
You bet. So what we'll do there, Marcus, we'll look up their ordinance. If they have an impact fee in place, we'll definitely include it. Include Live Oak, Universal City, but we're kind of thinking Schertz, New Braunfels, Seguin. Are there any other peer cities that you all like to compare yourself to that we want to make sure we capture in benchmarking?
I would say Buda and Kyle.
Okay. Yep. Buda. They have water, wastewater, and they're in the process of implementing roads. In Kyle, I don't know. Jessica, do you know if they have water, wastewater over in Kyle?
I don't know that they do. We'll double check.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And I know that the Seguin program is fairly new. I think that was in 2019. I think they adopted that one. So, yep. Okay. So this is the
gas drop as well if they do it.
Okay.
I don't think they do right now, but we'll check.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's something that if it's going to be a question for council, we can also indicate at the bottom that, Bastrop, Kyle, whatever cities don't have impact fees in place, just so that the graph is complete with all the information you would need.
Yeah. So we would definitely have, as one of the columns, what is the impact fee now in Cibolo based on your current collection rates for the development scenario? Okay. And then we typically like to show what the components are, the water, the wastewater, and the road, just so you can kind of see what. Sometimes there's the question about, how much of that is water versus wastewater, et cetera. So we'll have all that listed out. Okay.
Eddie.
Yes, sir.
Real quick, another entity came to mind, San Marcos, if we didn't include, because I know there are members of council that do compare a lot of what San Marcos is doing to Cibolo.
we were talking to them about roads. So I think they have water, wastewater, but I don't think they have roads yet. But we'll certainly check on that though.
Appreciate it.
You bet. And I don't know, is San Antonio a push? I think they have it in place. We could include San Antonio, or maybe some of the communities there, the suburb cities that might have
And
them.
Antonio has it kind of by pressure zone. So we could, if you want to, we could look at one of the upper pressure zones that's kind of on the north side of town.
Yeah, I would try to have something very similar, comparable, as far as the old cliche, apples to apples,
Right.
try to be competitive in the market. I mean, San Antonio is a little bit different than Cibolo, right?
Mm-hmm.
Eddie, I was just going to add that we don't see a lot of communities with drainage impact fees, not as many as have roadway and water, wastewater. So there may be kind of a smaller sampling for that comparison on the drainage impact.
Yeah, good catch, Jim. There really are only a handful of cities that have the drainage program in place. We're actually working with the city of Portland down there by Port Aransas. To implement a drainage as part of their impact fee program. North Texas, there's 2 cities that have the drainage piece, Corinth, and I believe it's the Colony. But drainage is a relatively new one. I mean, it's allowable under law, so nothing wrong with it. So, but we may, in the apples to apples, we may have to do a chart that doesn't include the drainage if we're comparing, maybe the other 3. Just so we get a clear picture if that starts coming into play on economic impact. The development community will come out and say, you're running off development and with these impact fees. And, Midlothian up in North Texas, they actually put a moratorium on the impact fee program from 07 through 11. And impact fees didn't slow down growth one bit. They have done a lot of analysis there, but you're kind of in the growth path of growth. So we'll probably hear that challenge in the public hearing, that this will run off development. But you have to think of it this way: if new development's not going to be chipping in on the cost of those facilities, who's going to pay for that? So it's going to be on the other side of that ledger, if you will, and that's your tax base. So, okay. We do have a detailed schedule that we were working with staff, and this itemizes everything for staff, all the way from not only our advisory committee meetings, but when we're having our individual staff meetings to review land use assumptions or preliminary costing and things like that. But more importantly, what we're also showing is a workshop with council, resolutions, and the required noticing. There's a lot of administrative things that are going to be running in the background to head up to this August 24th public hearing. There's got to be a resolution 60 days in advance calling for a public hearing to update the program. There's got to be noticing 30 days in the paper. The reports have to be made available. So there's some things that have to be met in order to satisfy the law as part of the update. So we provide this. Rudy and Lisa have this, and so this is kind of helps work through the process. Just to let you know, there's a lot of other things going on in the background there, but we will be meeting 4 times. The 4th one is, we call it out as optional. If we think we can get to where we want to be with a collection rate in that 3rd one, great. But if we need to have that 4th one, we'll certainly do that. If we don't need it, we may bank it and have a second workshop if needed with the council, however that might go down. So, but the important thing is we have 4 slots with you all right now, and if we need the 4th one, it's there. Even if it's on Albert, even on Friday night or Sunday. No, I'm teasing. Okay. All right. Some of the technical elements. Any questions on some of the stuff we've kind of gone through already? Okay.
I checked. Kyle has water and wastewater impact fees.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I didn't think that they had roads, but I know, Austin, I think they just adopted the roadway impact fee. That might be a little too far north, but, Austin's got roads, Lockhart, Georgetown, Leander is doing the study. There's a lot of communities on the north side there, but that might be getting a little out of away from the Cibolo market. But We talked about service areas a little bit, and this is a nuance that really needs to be called out. Impact fees are only collected within service areas, and roads has a little unique catch there, and for roads, the service areas can't be greater than 6 miles. Not only that, for roads, impact fees can only be collected within the city limits. And the reason for the 6 mile limit is to ensure that monies that are collected on the north side of town, they're not spent on facilities on the south side of town. It's just that, it's in the general vicinity of where development's occurring. You have these infrastructure improvements that are going to fund those things. And there are two, right now you do have 2 roadway service areas. You have a north and a south. Really the dividing line is State Highway 78. We will be visiting with staff about maybe a third one because of, kind of the long-term potential growth out here. We know there's some non-annexation areas. There's some checkerboarding things going on there. So we'll be working with staff on that, on what might be an appropriate dividing line for that final third area. And it's mainly to comply with the 6 mile limit. Water, wastewater, and we have some images here. The water is your CCN boundary. It's you got Cibolo and you have is it Green Valley, Rudy, or Garden Valley? Okay, I see you mouthing that. I think you said Green Valley.
Green Valley,
Green Valley. Okay. And we're also going to be visiting with Rudy and team because we're aware of a swap that's going to be occurring on some water CCN area for long-term development. So we'll be getting with them on that. But generally, your water boundary is your CCN boundary. Your wastewater is your ETJ. And so we've kind of highlighted that there. I don't know if this map is totally correct because there's some ETJ area to the far east here along I-10. And then your drainage area. Right now you have 3. You have the Town Creek Drainage Basin, the Deeps Creek, and the Cibolo Creek. There's that Santa Clara that's out there. That's not in the program right now. We'll be visiting with staff on if that's something we want to bring in as part of the update, to bring in that new drainage basin down the far south there. Any questions on service areas and why all that has to be called out?
Just out of curiosity, this might be really not the scope of this conversation, but since Green Valley does own the water rights, these impact fees, is there sort of a sharing between these special utility districts and the city, or how does that work?
Jessica, I'll turn that one over to you.
Well, we can only charge them within your CCN. Now, like the city of Fort Worth is a wholesale provider to other customers, and they do charge impact fees to their customer cities. I don't believe that's something you're doing right now, but it's something you could consider in the future. Probably you would have to do it at the time of renegotiating your contract.
Okay, so for instance, the boundary that the Green Valley, rather than the city of Cibolo, as far as water goes, we wouldn't charge an impact fee at this point for water.
Right, there would not be a water impact fee. So I can see on this map that there are some areas that are within your city limits that are in the Green Valley CCN.
Yes, like I am. Like my community is Green Valley, for instance.
Okay, then you would, if you were to build a new house, you would pay the roadway impact fee and the drainage impact fee, and probably the wastewater impact fee, assuming that you have City of Cibolo wastewater service, but you wouldn't pay the water impact fee.
The Green Valley does charge impact fees on
Green Valley though charges.
So you would charge the Green Valley.
Right.
You'd pay their impact fee. Thank you.
Okay, interesting. Okay.
And so that may be something we also want to consider when we're looking at these comparisons is what is the Green Valley water impact fee, especially since a lot of those customers are possibly within your city limits.
Of course, I mean, because if I'm a new developer, I would like to understand sort of, if we're making policy changes overall to a total sort of cost for for a developer to come in, it'd be good to understand what would be the totality of something before we start making policy changes, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anyways, okay, thank you.
But what we're dealing with again, Marcus, is only the city's portion of that cost. So we're isolating it to only So we're not double dipping with anyone else. Okay.
Okay.
On this image here over on the lower left, this is the roadway, kind of the roadway map. We have a service area 1, 2. We've kind of put a line down there off of, I think it's called Schmokel Road, Schmokel and possibly Valley View as maybe a dividing line, maybe leaving this third area down along the I-10 corridor. Something we still need to ferret through, but again, it's, and you can kind of see the rings. There's these little 6-mile rings. We just want to make sure that we're kind of staying within that limit there. Okay. Okay. Service units. I kind of alluded to it earlier. For roads, it's the vehicle mile that's being generated during the PM peak hour. That's the service unit for road. And we have a graphic here. We'll talk about that here in a second. For water, wastewater, it's the meter. And then for drainage, it's the square footage of impervious surface. So how does that vehicle mile work for roads? So if you think about a 4-lane road that has a certain length, there's a carrying capacity for different kinds of facilities of roads, whether it's an arterial class road or a collector road. There's different speed limits, so there's a different carrying capacity. So if you have, by way of an example, if you have a 4-lane road, in 2 miles of length, and it has a carrying capacity of 530 vehicles in the peak hour per lane, then you can quantify 530 times 4 times 2. That has a carrying capacity of that segment of road has a carrying capacity of 4,240 vehicle miles of capacity. Okay, that vehicle miles is not only used for quantifying capacity, it's also can also be used to quantify actual impact now. We're going to be collecting tube counts throughout the community, and if you have a tube count across say Hackerville Road or Green Valley up on the north side there, if you have Green Valley, if you have traffic volume count in a directional count and you have segment of road, we can quantify vehicle miles of demand, actual demand that's out there. Okay. And then thinking about new development, if let's say you have a 100-unit residential development coming in, we develop what's called a service unit equivalency table. Trip rate is vehicles, trip length, miles. We have a corresponding service unit equivalent for different kinds of land uses. We can quantify based on size and type of development the number of vehicle miles of impact by new demand. We are going to be collecting, NAMU, is it 15, 20 count locations throughout Cibolo?
15.
Yeah, I think it's about 15. So, and we're going to be positioning those tube counters primarily where some of the CIP projects that are already defined that we think we want to bring into the program. And the reason for that is because, right, there's traffic that's already out there. And if let's say it's a 2-lane road now, but it's going to be an ultimate 4 or 6-lane, we need to be able to quantify the excess capacity. So if you've got 2 lanes in traffic and we're adding 4 more lanes, and let's say it's just a total rebuild that's necessary, we've got to net out that existing utilization, giving us the remaining or the net capacity that's being provided by the CIP. So that's why we have to do those counts. Okay. Any question on roads, the vehicle mile? Oh, and the reason we're using the PM peak hour is, number one, you're already, well, you're not using that, but most roads are sized to meet the peak hour of travel. You got a morning rush hour, you got an afternoon rush hour. Actually, there's an off peak or a noon, but the biggest one is in the PM peak hour, typically between 4 and 6. You've got a lot more land uses that are active. In the morning, it's typically your journey to work, home to work. In the afternoon, you've got office, commercial, you got a lot more things going on. There's typically just more volume out there. So roads are typically designed and sized to meet that PM peak hour. And the operational analysis is predicated on the PM peak hour. So we're able to really drill down and get that the technical calculation on the capacity being made available by the CIP. Okay. Jessica, the water, wastewater?
Yeah, on water, wastewater, this is just an example from another city. And in this case, they had a 3/4 inch as the standard size for a single family home. And what we see here is the maximum operating capacity as defined by the American Water Works Association. And this is in gallons per minute. GPM is gallons per minute. And so what we see is that in this case, the 3/4 inch meter can pass 25 gallons per minute, and that has a service unit equivalent of 1. And then as we move up through the larger meter sizes, if we go down to the 1.5 inch meter, it can pass 50 gallons per minute. So it's 2 times the capacity of a 3/4 inch meter and has a service unit equivalent of 2. And we'll get into kind of some of the details of how we use this in our calculation. But the reason this is important is because this is also going to be, as we're applying these impact fees to customers, someone with a 4-inch meter is going to be paying 20 times the impact fee of a single family home, unless we set up some sort of residential, non-residential rate. So this is just something to keep in mind as we're looking at our water wastewater impact fee calculation. Does anybody have any questions about this?
All righty, Lane, yes, sir.
No, I just say I don't have any questions on it.
Oh, okay, all right. Feel free to ask though. Okay, land use assumptions. We've kind of hit all around this earlier. We're looking at the growth that's anticipated over the next 10-year window. And we look at growth in terms of 2 things, residential growth and non-residential, primarily because there's different travel characteristics and different water demands associated between the 2 different kinds of things. So for residential, we're kind of looking at population growth, converting that to dwelling units so we can quantify how many units or service units of growth there's going to be. In the non-residential development, we look at employment. We look at employment by what we call basic service retail, basic being industrial type growth, service is like office, and then retail is your commercial. We look at the employment side again because travel characteristics are different between these kinds of land uses. And we use these main 4 for quantifying the growth that we see, the 10-year growth. In other words, we're going to be looking at year 2021 through 2031. And that resultant growth, what does that translate to in terms of service units of demand? That would form the denominator in this cost per service unit calculation. Okay, so the land use assumptions are really going to be prepared by several service area, right? So for roads, you're going to have, you'll have the CIP north service area, or 1, 2, and maybe that 3rd one. For the wastewater, we're going to be including only the CCN. For the drainage, we're going to have the ETJ. So the land use assumptions are going to be pretty robust to be able to capture all the different components for each one of these infrastructure pieces. But the important thing is that this growth is going to serve as the basis for how much CIP we need. Okay, we're going to get into that a little bit more here in just a minute. Okay, the capital improvements plans, there are some criteria by way of roads of what can be considered for impact fees. And that is mainly roadway facilities on your thoroughfare plan that are classified as arterial or collector class streets. On the image here on the next page is basically any of the streets that have color. You can see you have your freeways, red are your major arterials, the minor arterials are in purple, and then green are kind of your collector class facilities. Any one of those facilities can be considered as part of the impact fee program. We're going to be looking at that CIP that's already been developed and bringing those in. But if there's more projects needed to cover growth, we're going to be looking at your thoroughfare plan at these facilities. Okay. Now you're going to ask, well, wait a minute, 78. That's TxDOT, they're going to be paying for this thing. Well, if the city is making a contribution for any kind of state facility, it's going to be only the city's portion of cost. So let's say there's utility relocates, or there's some right-of-way dedication, or the city is going to get the right-of-way for TxDOT. Well, only that portion of cost is what's going to be considered in the calculation. Okay, any question on CIPs? Let's see. This image here depicts 2 things. These on the left are the projects that were identified as part of the 2013 roadway CIP. And the image here on the right are projects that are part of the CIP, the 2019 through 2022 CIP. So we want to certainly include as many of those as we can into the program. I'd alluded to, we're going to be putting down tube counters. We want to make sure we hit these projects that have already been in the impact fee program, as well as ones that we may bring in, so we can quantify the traffic that's out there and net that out of our cost per service unit calculation. Okay. Water, wastewater, Jessica.
Yeah. On the water wastewater CIP, we're going to be looking at existing CIP projects that the city has already identified. And these are going to include things like transmission mains, distribution lines, pump stations. I know we mentioned earlier on the call, storage tanks. And this doesn't have to be a new storage tank that you're putting into your system. If the tank that we were discussing that has the brand new city logo on it still has capacity to serve growth, we can include that on our impact fee CIP and continue to recoup the cost of that tank. So any improvements that we're putting in the ground to serve growth or existing projects that still have capacity to serve growth are going to be included on our CIP. And on the wastewater side, we're going to look at gravity mains, interceptors, wastewater lift stations, any treatment capacity we need. So these are the types of things we're going to be looking at on the water wastewater CIP.
And Jim for drainage.
Right, so on the drainage impact fees, as Eddie said earlier, we look at the square footage of impervious area. Drainage is kind of a little bit different because we don't have this kind of concrete thing of cars going down the street every day, toilets flushing, people turn on a faucet. We don't really think about drainage until it's really raining, right? We've got maybe a flood issue. So we look at that on a watershed basis, and really the driver for that additional stormwater runoff that we have to handle with drainage facilities is the addition of impervious area, concrete, parking lots, roofs, all of those kind of features. So that's how we look at the impact, and then we'll be using the Stormwater Master Plan, CIP, for project identification, and then looking at those impacts on a watershed basis.
So this image here is from the current drainage CIP. So that'll be the starting point for the analysis. Again, we'll be visiting with city staff on if we're going to want to include any of the Santa Clara, but for right now we're definitely focused on the Town Creek and the Dietz and the Cibolo watershed areas at this time. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't mention it, but kind of typical projects are culvert improvements, channel improvements, widening, regional detention ponds, detention facilities, things like that.
Any question on the CIP? The kinds of things we can be thinking about? Okay. Kind of already talked about the cost considerations, really construction, engineering, right-of-way, debt service, the city's portion of new projects, recoupment projects, projects that have recently been built. We'll get with Lisa and Rudy on getting the actual costs, because we want to plug the actual costs into the program. When we develop plans or estimated costs for some of the new projects, we're not going to be going, adding in a lot of costs. We want to try to keep it conservative. And when I say conservative for road purposes, that's going to be things like not including contingencies. And the reason for that is we just want to get the cost of putting those facilities on the ground. And we don't want to overinflate those, because as part of the analysis, if there is a difference in the cost per service unit on a service area basis, and it's greater than 10%, it could put the city in a potential refund situation. So when we do the estimating for new projects, we really look at bid tab information on what that was used there, 12-month averages from TxDOT or some other recent projects in the vicinity, and we keep those on the low side, if you will. Okay. I also mentioned that we're including the cost of this programmatic update, and that the impact fee pays for that, but that gets rolled into the calculation also, so that in the next update, the program pays for that cost. Okay. So the cost per service unit is the credited cost of the CIP divided by the projected service units of growth. So we're going to be quantifying, we're going to identify CIP projects. We're going to identify the cost of those projects. And the reason we call it the credited CIP cost is because there was a change in the impact fee legislation back in 01, And developers had a very good argument here. They said, hey, wait a minute, we're putting down infrastructure on the ground. We're raising the ad valorem tax value of the community, but yet we don't get any benefit out of that in the impact fee calculation. So the legislature agreed with development there, and so they put in this provision that if you want to determine the absolute maximum, you have to go through a ad valorem, or you have to do a credit analysis to determine what that increase in the ad valorem taxes would be, and to net that out. In the alternative, you credit the cost of the CIP by 50%. So what we've in visiting with city staff, we optioned out of service for doing that calculated maximum, but the anticipation is that we're not going to go above that 50% threshold. So let's save a few bucks, and so we're going to be crediting the cost of the CIP by that 50% and not go above that threshold. So right off the top of the bat, I mean, we're kind of talking about who's paying for what, right? Well, if we're giving a credit of the cost of the CIP by 50%, that means that your tax base is already picking up 50%. So if we start thinking about policy and recommend that, you know what, city council, we think new development should only pay for 20%. Well, that delta of 30% flips over to your tax base. So we bring that up because it's an important factor in the calculation, and that's that credited cost of the CIP. Of course, and I just alluded to, the fee can be less than the maximum. It's whatever policy decision is in play that the council agrees to, and it can consider some of the economic development strategies that are going on and those kinds of things, what your neighbors are doing, et cetera. But that's purely a policy decision, okay? And then the cost per service unit is going to be calculated by service area. So for roads, we're already going to have 2, possibly 3 numbers. For your water and wastewater, you'll have 1 number for each one of those components. For your drainage, you'll have 1 number on that cost per square foot. I don't know, Jim, let me ask you out here kind of in front of the advisory committee, could that cost per square foot vary by basin? Could there be a significant difference?
I think it could vary by basin. I think you'd have to think about how much you would want it to vary.
Gotcha.
There might have to be a good reason in terms of the type of land. If you had like maybe a very different type of land use in one basin that you expected, maybe one drainage basin you kind of expected it to all be commercial for whatever reason, and maybe not as much single family residential. So I think generally it's probably going to be about the same.
Yeah, it may have its own independent number, but even in the case of roads, I can tell you now we're going to have different numbers, and so it's going to boil down to another policy consideration. Well, if the North came in at $1,200 a service unit, and service area B, or that area south of 78, came in at $1,000 a service unit, and we want to collect 50%, we want to collect the maximum amount. Someone's going to say, well, golly, it's more expensive to be on the north side of 78 than it is on the south side. Here's the policy question. Do you want to just make it across the board where let's just make it $1,000 for service area north side, so it's the same as south? So we'll have to go through that. And so that there may be some of that consideration by basin also on the drainage side. Okay. Jessica's lucky. She only gets to calculate 1 number for each one. That's going to be the number for water and wastewater. We created a little graphic here to kind of help convey that cost per service unit calculation. And this is what we've used for the roads. We talk about projects by service area, and so the road projects are going to provide a certain amount of capacity at a cost. Okay, so if we add all the 4-lane roads, let's say upgrade to Garden Valley, and we're going to do something with Borgfeld Road or Hackerville Road. We summarize all those service units or all those vehicle miles of capacity in that service area. But then what we're also looking at and calculating that cost per service unit is how much of this CIP is necessitated. Okay, so 2 things go on, because there's already traffic that's already in that service area. Maybe there's some traffic on the roadways chewing up some of the capacity. You're already eating away at some of that capacity, right? And there could be some deficiencies within the service area that we want to net out of the calculation. So we're already kind of chewing up on this capacity. But more importantly, if our land use assumptions say, hey, in 10 years, we're only going to need 60% of the capacity, well, that's only the portion of the cost we consider. Okay, doesn't mean that we're going to lose that the excess capacity. That's going to roll over in the next impact fee update. But since the law is very specific, you can only charge an impact fee on the cost necessitated to new development. So if in service area 1 for roads, or that service area north, if we only need 60% of that CIP, fine, that's what it's going to be. Now, the one thing that I will point out is, we're going to have two numbers that'll come up, right? I already kind of said, just for example, 1,200 in the north, 1,000 in the south. Someone's going to say, well, let's add more projects, so it raises that south one. Well, that's not the way it works, because we're calculating on a unit cost basis. We're adding all these projects together, and unless some projects have bridges or very expensive infrastructure, bridge structure versus culverts, that's what's going to have a play in on making that cost per service unit vary. If we had everything was kind of generic and we had a cost per linear foot for different kinds of roads, your number would be about the same. So someone's going to say, well, what happens if we grow faster than what we say in our land use assumptions? Well, if we only needed 60% of the CIP in service area, let's say the southern service area, at a 3.5% growth rate, and now we're going to grow at 5%, we still have plenty of room to cover that added growth. But we'll show you that number crunch once we get to it. If it does come to that we have more growth that is going to consume all that the capacity being provided, what it does is it drives that cost per service unit down, because you're stretching that cost to cover all that growth. Okay, so this graphic is really kind of help aim, kind of focus you on, okay, since it's a unit cost basis, it's $1,200 per vehicle mile for each one of these, each one of the projects, and if we only need 60% of that CIP, well, that's all we're using in the calculation, and that becomes that cost attributable to growth divided by your future growth. That's summed up by service area from the land use assumptions. That becomes your cost per service unit. Okay. Any question on the concept there of that cost per service unit? We can always come back to it. I wanted to point out, and I said at the outset, we have a cost per service unit, we have an assessment rate and a collection rate. And it's important that we distinguish between these two. And again, the study is we're gonna calculate what's the derived fee, what's that maximum that we can collect. And that could be your assessment rate. Then it's going to be a policy decision on what you want to collect. And so what we have here is what we're showing by the different components. This is your ordinance that you currently have in place. And it looks like you're collecting the absolute max in each one of the service areas. Okay, so that might be a policy consideration. Do we maintain whatever so in 2013, the cost per meter for water was $35.95. And that is credited. The actual cost was $71.90, right? Because you went with that 50% credit. So that's the maximum you could consider. There's a policy decision to say we're collecting the maximum amount. So $35.95. Let's say in the new calculation here, we come up with water comes out to be $45.95. You're going to say, golly, $3,500 to $4,500. That's going to be kind of steep. And then depending on size of pipe, that's going to could potentially be steep. That's where the policy consideration is going to come in. Should we increase it from $35.95 to $36.50, 10% in that incremental increase? That's what we're going to probably be having a discussion about here in our third meeting once we get to all that. Okay. Any questions on assessment and collection? We do have service unit equivalency on the roadside, again, because land uses generate traffic differently. We'll have this equivalency table that breaks out major classes of land uses. You got residential uses, you have office, commercial, industrial, and institutional. We'll have a service unit generation for each one of these. And again, for the roads, that service unit equivalency table is based on data. It's based on trip rate data by land use type, and we typically get that from ITE, the trip generation manual. And then it's based on, and that's vehicles, and it's also based on length, trip length, and that's modeled information by trip type. And so if you think about your home to work trip, you know, what we're seeing in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the home-based work trip is on average 14.9 something miles for the home-based work trip. In Cibolo, it's probably going to be a lot smaller than that, but we're gonna have a limit of 6 miles. So if the home to work trip on average, and it's a modeled number that we're driving, we're using the AMPO model to get the major trip types of home to work, from work to non-home, or work to commercial areas, or from commercial back to home. We'll have that tailored service unit equivalent, but it will be capped at 6 miles max. Okay. And as Jessica alluded to, you'll have the service unit equivalency for water and wastewater. It'll be the different meter sizes, and there'll be a cost by different meter size. So that's how the fees will be calculated. And then again, the cost per square footage of impervious surface for drainage basin. Okay. So the way it would work, and what this sample calculation is aimed at showing, is how do you calculate the fee? We're going to actually show a number here in a second, but for roads, it's a two-step process. Development comes in, staff sees this application that's comes in, and it's going to be the number of vehicle miles generated by the table using the equivalency table. So we have X number of development units, whether it's 50,000 square foot of shopping, plus there's maybe some apartments on the site. And then we use the service unit generation, the equivalency table, to calculate how many development vehicle miles are being the demand that's being created by the site. We take that demand and then multiply it by the collection rate, or that cost per vehicle mile. That becomes the impact fee for roads. Okay. For water and wastewater, it's really going to be the size of pipe that's needed to serve the site, whether it's a 1-inch, or if it's something very massive for industrial, light industrial, or distribution, a 4-inch line or whatever. And there'll be a cost associated for each one of those lines. So it's the line size times the cost per service unit, then that's going to be your impact fee. For the drainage, it's going to be the area of impervious surface times that collection rate on a cost per square foot basis, and that'll be the actual impact fee due. So here's kind of an example of what we're saying here. Let's say there's a development located in South Cibolo, and the collection for roads is $19.40 per vehicle mile, $35.95 for water, $17.70 for wastewater, and drainage at $10.15 per living unit equivalent. So in calculating the roads, and this is for looks like one single family residence. Oh no, sorry. One development times 1.21, there's a service unit generation of 1.21 vehicle miles. 1.21 times your collection rate, or the impact fee per service unit. The actual impact fee for a single family residence is $23.47.74. For water, the minimum line size 3/4 inch meter times your collection rate, $35.95 is your water impact fee. Your wastewater impact fee, 3/4 inch meter times the $17.70. Drainage, number of service units times that cost per service unit. Add it all up, the 4 components. Well, that turns out to be an actual impact fee of $8,700. So, individually, it doesn't seem like much, but collectively, well, we're adding the cost of each one of these components. And that's why when we do that benchmarking, that's why we show the different components and what's the overall fee when we're comparing to other communities. So that benchmarking table will really help, I think, in thinking about, well, if we can increase our collection rate, what should we go to? Is it too much for the development community to handle? We'll be able to have all those kinds of discussions then. Okay. Any questions of how the impact fee calculation works? We're going to make it, by the way, we're going to make it easy on staff. We're going to give them a cost calculator. It's all going to be spreadsheet driven, pull down menus. so they based on size and development, it'll all calculate out once we plug in the new collection rates that are adopted by council. That spreadsheet, and depending on how staff wants to use it, if they want to put that up on the website so developers can use that and they can kind of guesstimate what their fees are going to be, that's certainly a tool that could be out there and up on the website. Okay. All right, land use assumptions. So what we wanted to get down to, and here's where we wanted to get your thoughts and comments on, is growth rates. We kind of talked about that the LUA is going to be looking at 10-year growth from 21 to 31. We're going to be looking at POP and employment, those two different components, and deriving that we'll use for determining how much growth, net growth over the 10-year window for CIP development. So what we've done is we've looked at some growth. So how you've been growing in the past through a couple of different sources. We not only have census data, that's kind of in the orange line, how you've been growing from 2010 back, but we also have data from your comprehensive plan, and that is highlighted in, I'm sorry, there's a projection from your comprehensive plan. But what we wanted to look at more importantly was, how are you growing? How has Cibolo been growing the last, say, 3 years, the last 5 years prior to that? And based on census data, AMPO data, SNAMU, were there any other historical growth rates that we were looking at? Is there building permit data in here, or TAP building rate data?
They're just the building permit data that the city gave us where they had their projection.
Oh,
the staff.
okay.
Yeah.
Basically, you've been growing the last couple of years at about a 4% compound annual growth rate for the last 2 years. Looks like 2019, 2016 through 19, 3 years. Prior to that, you were growing at about a 5.7% annual growth rate. Overall, a little over 5%, 5.2%. And so we got some data. City staff's already made some projections. They have a lot of good data going forward. But we wanted to compare, more importantly, two trend lines. The comprehensive plan growth rate, which was going forward at about a 3.5%, and your historical growth rate, your 3-year historical growth rate, which is coming in at about 4%. And so, looking at this data, and based on how you have been growing, we're seeing the city that's going to be growing probably somewhere in about the 3.5 to 4% growth rate over the 10 years. Now, does that mean it's going to be the same for each year over the 10 years? No, it could go up. It could be a little higher annually, and then it kind of levels out. But collectively, we see the forecasted the city within the city limits growing at about a 3.5% growth rate, and that's really kind of based on the data that the city has given us. So at a 3.5% growth rate by year 2035, the Cibolo population could be at about 56,000. At a 4%, it could be up to about 60,000. We think it's going to be somewhere in there for within the city. Now that's only within the city. Some of the data that we've already captured outside of the city suggest a higher growth rate. In the ETJ, growth rate up to about 5%. We haven't ferreted through the numbers yet, but we're thinking that that's probably going to be more in the 5% or up to 5% rather than within the city. In talking with Lisa and Rudy, we know there's a lot more multifamily going on now in the city. Currently within the city, there's a lot more single-family residential projects going on just outside the city limits, and so that's why we think that that's probably about right, that there'll be a higher collection rate. I'm sorry, a higher compound annual growth rate in your ETJ than within the city. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to kind of capture your thoughts on what that meant for population. Do you think we're going to still, and this is where we're seeking your comment here, do you think we're going to still kind of maintain historic growth, and the trend is really kind of running kind of right on line, either from the historic growth rate, Comprehensive plan was a little bit low, but we see it somewhere at about 3.5 to 4%. And so we want to kind of give you capture your thoughts on what that growth rate might be. I don't know if we've got some of the water meter data. Jessica, have we gotten that yet? That we can look as another source of some of the trends?
Yeah, and that'll probably be a little bit different, because it's a different service area. So that's something else we could pull into this.
Yeah.
Jessica, one of the things that'll change with the water meter service area is the fact that for an extended period of time, the city really didn't have any growth in its CCN. Now we have 3 major land development projects underway, and totaling about 2,400 units if the 3 of them build out. And with the growth rates we're seeing in those, if they do, we'll probably see the 2,400 water meters be added to the city probably over a 7 or 8 year period, which would mean you might see an uptick and then a flattening again.
Mm-hmm.
Might go up a little bit and then kind of flatten back out. And I think Eddie was trying to say that there isn't a way to make a smooth line. The line is what it's going to be based on land use, the availability of usable land. And with the addition of wastewater treatment available now to the east portion of below 78, that's going to also impact that area with some wastewater growth that basically was not being picked up, will be picked up.
Yeah, and I think what Eddie has here in a couple of slides is that we are projecting a higher growth rate for water wastewater than we are for roadway, trying to capture some of that new area.
Yeah, so we have population that we're looking at. We also have employment data. Right now we're not breaking it out by the service, basic service retail or the industrial, the office, and the commercial. We're just looking at total employment. This is data from AMPO. We need to cross-check it with some of the data from that the economic development folks may have. There was the market retail study. We want to kind of cross-check some of the data, but what it suggests over the period 2015 through 2045, the employment growth at about a 4.1% clip, compound annual growth rate. So population growing about 10,000 employees, and this is over a much larger period, but it suggests that it's running a little higher than population. And so I guess the question to you would be, does that seem about right? Is there employment? Folks are either coming into Cibolo for employment and then leaving, since that growth rate is higher, or does that not seem about right? So that's an open-ended question, kind of a prompt on 2 things: population growth and employment growth.
What is the impact on COVID-19 on this development?
So that is, I guess, to be determined. We're going to have to get with staff on that. I don't know if Rudy, if you have seen like a sudden drop off in growth, but I guess from a bigger picture, with these trend lines, we have actual data of how we've been growing since 2010 through 2021, and that's the current forecast by the city at about 34,600. You have had growth through the 2020. Do we see that kind of continuing on, because we're forecasting, and we're making this forecast so that we have enough capital projects to cover growth, the capital projects being on the road, water, wastewater, and drainage side. But this kind of gets to the heart of your question. Well, did COVID slow down growth? Well, it could have, but will it continue to hamper growth in the future? Maybe, but maybe things will start picking back up. But that's why we have 2 things going on. We have, number one, since we're developing a cost on a service unit basis, and if we have plenty of capacity to cover growth on the different infrastructure components, it really wouldn't matter if it flattens out or all of a sudden there's a spike. We should have enough CIP to cover growth. The other thing is, since we've already credited the cost of the CIP by 50%, and maybe we're collecting that 50% max, yet to be determined by policy. But since we're on a unit cost basis again, and if we decide to do any kind of increase incrementally, then we're not, it's not going to be for 10 years. We're looking at it incrementally over the next 5 years up until that next update. So the fact that we have periodic or more periodic than 5 year, we'll have periodic update and we're on a unit cost basis. Those kinds of things should kind of level out in the wash, if you will, looking at a 10-year window. Does that kind of help get to your question there?
I guess my concern is I see a lot of commercial property that's empty.
I'm sorry, that's what?
I see commercial property around the city that's not being rented out. So there's a lot of empty units. But I do see the housing development moving forward and a lot of houses being built. I just feel like COVID-19 is kind of skewing the numbers a little bit, and it's hard to determine the actual impact.
Yeah. Still though, those units were built, right? They may not be leased out now, but the hope is that that'll pick up, and so that demand will eventually come. So those empty units you're seeing out there now, they've already been obviously assessed, and the city has collected on an impact fee, and that's just kind of the market thing to kind of fill those. But yeah, that's some things that kind of, you look at that and you say, well, you know, how is that going to play out in the demand for infrastructure? Well, we have to take a look at this bigger picture, because, and that's why we have to forecast this growth. And we see possibly some cyclical things happening because of COVID, but we also see a return of growth and development. And I don't know, Rudy, if there's some of the stuff that you've seen from the retail study, or if there's any anomalies you see in growth going forward.
No, the building industry, the home building industry never skipped a beat. They've worked hard through the last year.
And keep up.
As mentioned, some of those strip centers have been built, and I think there might be some small businesses that were hesitant to move in and waiting to see what happens with this COVID. The other thing that's changed a little bit is with kids at home, a lot of people were working from home. And so we didn't have, it seemed like for a few months there, it seemed like traffic was at a standstill. There was not a standstill, but just not a lot of traffic on the roads. Everything's just gradually coming back. I've heard that some materials early on back in the summer were some lumber, now steel, were in not short supply, but in limited supply and costing more. That just goes into but the home builders have not slowed down at all.
I guess my concern is like Cibolo Crossing, we have a lot of empty units. And if I'm a developer and I want to invest in our city and we increase the fee, that's not going to entice me to want to build in our city if I see an empty unit and I just have to pay a higher fee.
And so that's a very valid question there, Albert. And so that's probably something we're going to need to be thinking about when we get into that policy discussion. And maybe it's what we call revenue neutral. Maybe we keep the collection rate static at where it's at for another year, and then maybe there's a bump. Maybe it brings in the thought of this incremental increase, but that's a very valid point that we need to think about. Okay.
If I may, please, if I may, I've been sitting back. I wanted to make a comment on the growth potential. There seems to be, you've already seen, there's a growth potential on the north side of Cibolo versus growth south of 78. There is potential for growth south, but it lacks infrastructure right now. Where I'm concerned, and I'm eager to look into the positive results, there is, to my way of thinking, plenty of potential for commercial growth along I-10.
I agree.
Along with AW Texas and perhaps people building close to them. And I mean, now that there is wastewater out there, or there will be very, very shortly, full disclosure, I'm on the board of the Green Valley Water District, just so most of you know, but just in case. But the growth, especially the commercial, is something we need to really consider out along I-10, because it will happen out there. The growth in, you mentioned in the ETJ, yeah, it's exploding in the ETJ and beyond. Green Valley has hosted 4 and 5 water feasibility studies at every meeting I've been to. And that's happening between here and New Braunfels. And Cibolo, unfortunately, has no control over that because they're building on tiny lots. We don't like it, but we can't stop it. Thank you.
Is that tiny development? Have you seen that? Is that hit here in Cibolo? It's up in the Metroplex where you have these, they call them tiny houses, like 600 square foot to maybe up to 1,000, but they're itty bitty.
No, they're not that little. They're just on small lots.
Gotcha.
And they won't hook up to Cibolo because Cibolo would enforce larger lot size.
So all good thoughts here. I wanted to bring this up. We were going to try to. We haven't been able to confirm the actual percentages from the previous program. What did the 2013, 2014 impact fee program have? What was that growth rate? Just so we have just some other data. But I think we have enough in the trend line of what we're seeing. And even though employment's up, I kind of feel that the city is probably in a 3.5% growth rate within the city limits. The water, wastewater, it could be 4.5, maybe up to 5, as suggested. And the drainage being your ETJ area, same thing, up 4.5, maybe up to 5%. But wanted to capture what you all thought of that. And Rudy, you're certainly eligible to weigh in here too, as from staff's perspective, and Kelsey from economic development perspective, right? Economic development, or is it planning? Economic development. Okay, so you're nodding there. Okay.
May I ask, what do developers look at? Do they actually look at impact fees when they want to develop into a certain?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have seen that bigger national developers, they build that into their pro forma. Where there's more discussion is the local developer. The smaller, they do the smaller things locally. Could there be an impact there? That then spurs that next level of discussion. Well, should there be a policy consideration for giving the local developer a break, and get the national guys? But and that's certainly open to discussion later. But we're kind of thinking about it being big picture, because there's an impact that's going to be created. And if there is some waiving of fees or some discussion of reduction in collections, what bucket of money does that come from then to pay for these facilities? And that becomes your tax base.
I guess I would like to know the intent of the city. Are we intending on growing and enticing developments to come and develop within our city, and then they in turn can pay some of these fees and then build the infrastructure? Or I just don't know what.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have the latest summary of collections. Obviously, you have been experiencing development. Some of the multifamily development within the city. The water, wastewater is the development out there in your CCN and ETJ. So there could be a summary. There should be a summary on collections for each one of those components. That's actually kind of quantified on an annual basis. But I have not seen that. But I have to believe that any new development that's already come to Cibolo with your policy in place, they were assessed and an impact fee was collected.
A lot of some of the large residential developments, we enter into a public improvement agreement with the developer. So in lieu of collecting the impact fees, they're putting in additional infrastructure, as you mentioned, added capacity to roads, oversizing water lines, oversizing sewer lines to benefit the city in the long run. So, but we do have we can provide collection rates. What we do actually collect. As far as the growth rate consideration, I don't have a problem with the roadway and the roadway at 3.5, but I'm a little concerned with the water wastewater at 4.5, and maybe Tim can offer some help there. I'm thinking it's going to be at 3 to 3.5 also. I can't see the justification for 4.5% growth rate because we are winding down in our service area. Water definitely, and wastewater will open up a little bit in the future, but it's got to take the growth down south of Lower Seguin Road to do that. And I don't see that happening. Maybe at 10 years, 8 to 10 years.
Yeah, I would think that we're probably going to peak out in the water probably over the next 6 to 7 years. Rudy, wouldn't you think? When
I agree. Yes. Yeah.
Upload Crossing 2 will be done. All of Steel Creek could be done probably 7 or 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
Red River Ranch will be done probably in the next 2 years, plus or minus.
Right.
There's a few still large lot areas available where there could be multi-hundred housing developments, but we're slowly going to run out of capacity to serve on water meters. So with 5,900 meters now, and the potential for us to add, let's just say 2,000 meters over the next 8 years, 2,000 over 6,000 is a 33% growth over 7 or 8 years. So we would just need to take a look and see what that is. But after that, I think, like I said, I think you'll see the curve dramatically flatten as we run out of those areas, unless the last section, which is the Hakerville West,
right,
takes off. And that again is going to be wastewater inhibited until we can resolve the wastewater feed for that area. That as soon as the wastewater is handled, the water, we built the infrastructure, or building the infrastructure to supply it. So it's literally just going to be a wastewater restriction. All the other utilities are essentially available. AT&T and power is already there. So it's wastewater will be the key in that one as well. And that's probably, when you and I looked at that, we thought maybe there's about 4,000 LUEs possible in that area over a 20 or 30 year span. And then that's going to pretty much cap our water out at that limit. We won't be able to go beyond that because we don't have any CC left other than infill.
Well, we have the wastewater that's north of Arispe and east of Hagerville. That 4,000 LUEs, I can see that taking off, and then but south of Schaefer Road, west of Hagerville Road, until something's resolved south of Lower Seguin Road with wastewater, I just don't see that taking off anytime soon.
I would completely agree, and I think when we meet with Eddie and Jessica and everyone else here, I think those growth curves, the short-term growth curves for water, will be real easy to predict as far as the subdevelopments that are already underway and are, basically have a meter capacity and a growth rate that we can understand. It's the ones that aren't on yet that'll be the difficult ones, trying to figure out what's next and where next will be.
Yep.
Hey, Eddie, I just want to remind everybody that our agenda says that the meeting is over at 8:30. So
yes, ma'am.
We can't go too far past that.
We have 13 minutes, but we're really at the conclusion of our presentation here. I mean, we're at the Q&A, and then any action that you have, advisory committee on a growth rate. So we're right on track, I think. And great comments there, Tim and Rudy, on the perhaps 3.5% in the ETJ, but over the 10-year, up and then leveling out. So, but from the advisory committee, wanted to capture what your thoughts are there. If you feel that we should stick with a 3.5% for the roads, and maybe take a look at that for the water, wastewater, and drainage areas in the ETJ too.
Yeah, this is Marcus Manley. I mean, quite honestly, I would say we want to be consistent with what Rudy and Tim were saying. Clearly, they, obviously, you know, have access to more data than we do at this point. And quite honestly, if nobody really has any strong rationale or justification to say otherwise, then, based on our studies, let's stick to the 3.5%. Quite honestly, I'm still, pretty new to all this, and I didn't capture everything that Rudy and Tim was saying, but nevertheless, we'll catch on by, meeting two. But I don't see any reason. Now, one thing that we didn't talk about was the employment compound, the growth rate for the employment. I don't know if we wanted to talk about that, but
Sure.
Now, is that something that we're calculating the total 3.5 for everything, even with the employment rate?
Yeah. So, I mean, employment could grow at a different rate. The AMPO data, that's the Alamo Area MPO. They're your MPO, and they have forecasts, regional forecasts. We drew this data from the traffic analysis zones that span Cibolo. So this represents the Cibolo data. Sure, it's a greater period, 30 years. We would extrapolate it to the 21 to 31, but generally, since it's a linear thing, it'd be about a little over 4%. So, we could go with a little higher employment. If you can, and Rudy and Tim, do you have employers on the horizon that you see maybe coming to Cibolo? Is there a distribution center, industrial park, anything big that you see on the horizon that suggests a higher growth rate than if we kept it at 3.5%?
Eddie, I can take that one. Yeah.
Thanks, Kelsey.
Perfect. Yeah. So I guess the first thing, I just want to make sure I'm getting the right definition for this. So I know you said that this forecast from AMPO encompasses Cibolo, but is it just Cibolo, or is this including like our sister cities of Schertz and Selma in this calculation?
No, this is, we have clipped the areas to cover strictly the Cibolo area.
Perfect.
Just Cibolo City and ETJ.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we have seen, particularly from 2015 until 2021, we've seen a lot of growth in our employment, not just in the number of employers, but even in the number of employees that each employer has been employing. In particular, with the transmission manufacturer that's looking to employ about 900 when they're full out, they're already about 200 right now. So we are seeing more anticipated growth from that. And then, as someone else mentioned earlier, that I-10 corridor, we're really looking to make that a commercial and industrial corridor powerhouse for Cibolo. So I think it's very realistic to see a pretty marked increase in the daytime population and number of employees here in Cibolo.
Okay. So would you say that is that in the 4% range, or is that maybe at the 3.5%?
I think 4% would be a strong number for it.
Okay. Rudy or Tim, any thoughts there on employment down the I-10 corridor or citywide?
I agree with Kelsey. I mean, AW is starting to employ people. They have plans to grow pretty quick. There's going to be expansions to their facility. We understand that there are other outfits that have looked at the property around there and along the I-10 corridor. I think that you're going to see a strong number of jobs created along there.
Okay.
Eddie, I would just have to say that Kelsey's going to be the absolute expert. Right. He's got to agree on this thing. She knows exactly what's going on. She knows future possibilities. She knows where we stand with those things. So if anybody knows this, it's going to be Kelsey for sure.
Good. We'll touch base with Kelsey once we kind of bring our numbers in. And Kelsey, maybe we can cross-check with some of your projections to see if we're in line.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So back to the advisory committee as the clock's a ticking here, 8 minutes left. Any thoughts on growth rates? 3.5 population, maybe a 4% for employment per staff comment. Does that seem like a good starting point for this discussion?
Yes, that's a good starting point for this discussion.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree as well. So sorry, I agree as well. The only thing that I'm really concerned about is the constraints that Green Valley puts in our area, the ETJ, that we could have really little to no influence on. I mean, from my understanding of listening to their meetings, they are, and Bob, you can kind of attest to this, but they're experiencing a surge of meter installs and assessments and engineering kind of reports to see what they can handle infrastructure wise. So infrastructure is our main kind of choke right now. If we don't have it, we can't grow, especially commercially. And that's something that I've heard multiple times, with other builders, that we don't have the infrastructure to keep growing. So until that's in place, then they'll come. But that's just from what I hear.
Yeah, that's what I've encountered. I think I mentioned it earlier. The surge I've seen being on the board with developments happening between Cibolo and New Braunfels and in New Braunfels is just extraordinary. GV Sud is going to have to hire so many people in the next year or two just to keep up with it. But as an aside, Eddie, too, were you going to begin to already do some of your traffic studies on the main arteries as to traffic counts?
Yeah, so we're going to be collecting the data, the tube count data. I think we have them scheduled. Let's see, this week's spring break week. It's either the next week or the following week. I believe it's the week of the 20th.
Well, the reason I'm mentioning this, and I realize this is getting in the weeds a little bit, but if you're going to track a count on Hagerville South to I-10, I believe the bridge along the access road to go west is still blocked. So there won't be any traffic going in and out of there.
Gotcha.
And it's been under construction by TxDOT for what, a couple of years? I think they're approaching finishing it, but still, if you did a traffic count there, it's going to be insignificant.
We do have a count map that we've prepared, and we're going to be running that by staff to get feedback from staff on if those are great locations for the counts. So, but good point there. Good to know that.
Well, and people are smart. The people that go into San Antonio or parts south from I-10 have other ways. They can take Trainer Hale along Lower Seguin. So you might consider capturing right at something like Lower Seguin and Hagerville South might capture the same traffic.
Okay.
Like I said, it's getting into the weeds, but I wanted you to be aware of it.
Thank you very much. Good info to know. Okay. Any other thoughts by the advisory committee, or and we don't, I guess, since we don't have a chair and vice chair, I don't know how you all would, if you want to, if there's would be a motion, if you could do that now. Peggy, can they do that? Can they say, hey, can someone say, hey, we think a 3.5% is good for starters within the city, and 3.5 in the ETJ, and employment at 4%?
Someone can make a motion and second it.
Okay.
Okay, I'll make a motion to proceed with the 3.5% as far as the growth rate, and contingent upon further analysis going forward.
I'll go ahead and second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and I'm running your meeting. I apologize, but I'm a chair of my own planning and zoning commission. So, I don't, Peggy, could you call the roll on how the advisory committee might go?
Okay. I guess I'll just call your name and just tell me if yes or no if you vote yes. Robert Robinson.
Yes.
Albert Ramirez.
Yes.
John Frias.
Yes.
TJ Benson.
Yes.
And Marcus Matley.
Yes.
Okay, motion passed.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So we've given you a whirlwind of impact fees, and we're starting to delve into some of the technical involved. Hopefully it wasn't too overwhelming, but we will be revisiting these concepts in our next meeting. We'll also, at our next meeting, have the land use assumption projections. We'll use these growth rates as the starting point. We'll obviously vet those with staff, with Kelsey and Rudy and Lisa, so that we can present those at our next meeting. And then more importantly, what does that mean by way of infrastructure? So LUA would generate service units of demand for roads. We'd quantify that VMT. And then we'd quantify how much capacity is being provided in the CIP by VMT to make determinations if we need to make some project additions. Same kind of approach would be for water, wastewater, and then the drainage we would be looking at based on rate of growth and coverage. And so, but it would be I think the next time we meet, we'll have a lot more meat for you. But tonight was kind of the 101, get your feet wet. And then talk a little bit about how we see growth occurring. So I really appreciate you guys hanging in there. We got 1 minute left for I guess open fire by the committee for us. If there's any other comments or questions.
I feel like you dunked my head in the water.
You should sleep well tonight then.
Like I touched my toes on the surface. I mean,
you got beat up by that thing, huh? Okay.
I have a comment for the committee. All the committee members, if you have not done your Open Records and Public Information Act, you have to have it completed or you will not participate in the next meeting.
Next meeting is when?
I did that though, Peggy, for these.
I said if you haven't completed it, Marcus.
Okay, so make sure you have it on record. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You know, this is going to be fun to get all of us in the same room. We may need
when is that? When is the next meeting?
Well, the next meeting is slated for Tuesday, the 20th. And so we will let staff guide us if we will be in virtually or in person. Hopefully it'll be in person, but we'll let staff guide us on that. Okay. I've got 8:30, Peggy.
Okay.
I'll let you run the show here.
Yeah, if someone can make a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We're over.
Thank you, Peggy.
8:30. Thanks, everyone.
Nice to have met everybody. We certainly look forward to working with you, and we will see you on the 20th, hopefully in person, to have a little deeper dive with impact fees and some of our infrastructure discussion. Thank you very much, and see you soon. Okay, very good. All right. Good night. You bet.
Jessica, we have a meeting on Thursday, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, we do.
The 17th, right?
Thursday the 17th. I'll be sending out that invite. It'll be for 1 o'clock Thursday the 17th.
Perfect. Thanks.
Oh no. Oh, no. We also. You and I, Eddie's not invited. We also have a meeting on Thursday. This Thursday. Sorry, Eddie.
Sorry, Eddie.
Oh, okay.
Eddie, you want to come to the meeting? You can.
I may just proctor this meeting. All right.
Yes.
Very
yes.
good.
We'll see you on Thursday morning.
Thank you.
Very good. All right.